Hi, my name is Phil. I like to talk about politics, and in this video I'd like to tackle what various people have said about the environmental credentials of the various parties ahead of the general election. But first, if you'd like to see more of my videos, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So I think the first thing to do would be discuss what Friends of the Earth have been saying about each party's position. Climate group supporters have been quick to suggest that polling shows that climate is the #1 issue for members of the public ahead of the general election. This is not actually true, it's fourth, but it still places it quite high on the agenda for much of the voting public. But it isn't easy for ordinary members of the voting public to really judge the effectiveness of manifesto pledges. I mean, even a bad idea could be made to sound plausible. So, if you wanted to know how the policy for the NHS would really affect healthcare, well, you could ask a doctor or nurse, someone who works in the field. If you want to know about educational policy, how it would affect your child, well, you could ask a teacher. But if you want to know how an environmental policy will actually affect our climate, there isn't really much chance of you having easy access to someone in your community to really get the lowdown from. Now, this is where groups such as Friends of the Earth come in handy. Science-focused and inclusive, they have provided an evaluation of each party's green promises, and in what was a surprise to me, I have to say, Labour came out on top, narrowly ahead of the Green Party themselves. When I read it through myself, most of the parties seem to be providing good, strong policies, but I did think Labour's were a little weak in a couple of areas. But anyway, the key areas that most people tend to focus on, in my view, when it comes to environmental policy, is in doing what we do now, but a bit greener. So for example, we have in the past filtered out a lot of pollutants from chimneys, fossil fuel burning power stations, or we've switched to burning cleaner or more sustainable fuels. But what we really need to do is to change our economy to alter fundamentally the way we do things, not just clean up bad practices, but adopt good practices that still allow us to do the same things. So Friends of the Earth scored each party on its manifesto initially, and then they gave them time to clarify points. For example, several members of Labour's top team wrote to Friends of the Earth offering clarifications in a number of areas. Other parties did as well. For people who want to see the letter written by Labour, I've put a description, or rather a link in the description below. There are a few links, we'll come to those. The second one, actually, I'll come to now. I'll also link the Friends of the Earth assessment as well. I'm not just going to read bits out here, you can read that yourself. But needless to say, they were very positive about Labour, the Liberal Democrats and the Green Party. It would have been embarrassing if the Green Party had been criticised to any great extent. I'll let you have a few seconds to guess which party became the focus of criticism. Oh, you guessed it. Yes, the Conservatives. It wasn't all bad, has to be said, it wasn't all bad. They said that there were some decent policies on plastics and agricultural subsidies, but that its actual commitments were weaker in all areas compared to other parties. They further said that in some areas there were either bad policies or just no policies at all. A bad policy in this way, as far as I can tell, basically means not a weak policy, because that's a weak policy. It actively means one that would make the situation worse. So they have policies that will actively make things worse, as well as areas where they have no policy at all, which, is almost the same thing. Now, let's remember that it was the Conservatives, upon achieving power nearly a decade ago, that moved swiftly to remove subsidies from green forms of energy production and gave greater subsidies to oil companies instead. They were also the party to approve fracking, when everyone was saying, well, in the UK, it could be dangerous and there isn't really the economic benefit. Now, years later, after they did it anyway, we have to stop drilling every time we cause an earthquake, and the government have now had to admit that the economic benefits of fracking were somewhat exaggerated. And if you somehow imagine that Boris Johnson will lead a different Conservative Party, they also noted that he had failed to commit to existing Conservative policies. In other words, his commitments aren't just weaker than other parties, they're even weaker than his own party under previous stewardship. Now, it has to be said that when you read through this, one thing that sticks out is you go, oh, they haven't really evaluated the policies of the SNP. Now, as it's the third largest party in Parliament, or it was before the general election, it's very likely to be again, and does actually get to implement environmental policy in Scotland itself, I didn't think that was exactly fair, so I had to head over to Greenpeace for their assessment. They've obviously assessed it as well. A similar organisation in many ways and independent, but I'm not generally a fan of Greenpeace, but they are free of party politicals, so I still consider them, as I say, independent. Now, they took a slightly different view of things. They put the Green Party ahead, with the Liberal Democrats and Labour a little behind, followed by the SNP and Plaid Cymru. Now, the Conservatives, as you might expect, still were way behind. In fact, the only thing that stopped the Conservatives being in last place was the fact that the Brexit Party barely scored anything at all. I don't really know why they bothered to evaluate the Brexit Party, but they did. They decided to do everyone. Now, I'll also link to that, of course, if you want to see the breakdown of what Greenpeace think. And the way they broke it down as well is very easy to digest, because, you know, it's a nice little spreadsheet with good policies and disappointing policies for all of them. Now, one thing I did note, to my distress, I have to say, is that neither group mentioned Count Binface. You know, he is the intergalactic crusader who is attempting to stop Boris Johnson in his own constituency. He has environmental policies. You know, he has arguably more environmental policies than the Brexit Party, and they did the Brexit Party. You know, his plans include ambitious levels of recycling, and that Piers Morgan should be zero emissions by 2030. Now, I know what you're thinking. Not soon enough. Granted. But it still goes further than any other party on that policy. But anyway, that's the independent lowdown on environmental policies by independent groups. Labour, the Liberal Democrats and the Green Party all providing strong policies. I'll take the view, as well as Greenpeace did, that Friends of the Earth is probably unlikely to have considered the SNPs and Plaid Cymru's to be weak as well. The exact evaluation in terms of who came top will depend on which of those groups you thought had the best methodology. But one thing that they both agreed on was that the Conservatives were poor. Of all the serious parties, only the Conservatives were considered weak on climate change by both groups, and certainly not the party to vote for if climate change is your hot button issue. So I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, then please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.